Hello, everybody. Dr. Josh Long with AME Podcasts. This is my quest to talk to folks who are continuing making music beyond what I call the institution, who are what I'm a part of, and hopefully they are a part of, which I believe they are, lifelong learning in music education. This is sponsored by Art and Music Emporium, our quest to serve artistic excellence. If you are interested in subscribing to our YouTube channel where you're hearing this podcast, please do so. We're also on Facebook, in which you can like Art and Music Emporium or Joshua E. Long. We also have some performing initiatives going on, which are coming up in the near future. In July, on July 27th, we actually have the annual Community Band by the Sea in Wildwood, New Jersey. We also, on August 10th, have the Bethlehem Steel Company Legacy Band, which will be happening in Music Fest in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Both of those events, you can participate. There's a rehearsal, just the day before. We give music about a month prior. So if you are interested, please check us out at artmusicemporium.com and let us know if you are there. And if you're in the area and would like to come and listen to us, we would love that also. We also have a Patreon account, which all money and proceeds goes towards our performing initiatives, again, to help people continue making music and lifelong learning, as I call it. I'm so excited about our next guest. Her name is Martha Price. I met her when I was up in New Hampshire and also went over the border to Vermont in the Brattleboro Legion Band. Martha was playing, she was a saxophone player, and since then, I believe, has become the manager of the band. And I'm so superly excited to talk to her because she's always been very vibrant about community bands. And of course, she's been continue playing. So, hey, Martha, why don't you take it away?
Hi. So I am very excited, of course, about community bands, and I play baritone saxophone in the band, and then I march in some parades with the tenor saxophone. And I started playing in the fourth grade. I started on clarinet because I thought it was cool to put the instrument together, but then I didn't like that anymore. So I switched to saxophone, but there were so many alto saxophones in the fourth and fifth grade that the band leader asked me to switch to tenor, which I did. And that was in the seventh grade. And then in the eighth grade, we needed some lower instruments. So I switched to baritone saxophone. And we had a phenomenal, I grew up in New Paltz, New York, and we had a phenomenal band, middle school band director, who I think the whole of the middle school was in band. It was so
Wow.
cool. It was so great. I mean, we were playing really amazing music and stuff, and we used to go out on the football field and sort of semi-march for the football team. And it was really fun. And then we got into high school and it wasn't so fun anymore because the band director really wasn't so great just didn't have the great personality. And so many of us dropped out.
Okay.
And I did not pick up my instrument again until I was teaching middle school. I was teaching middle school science. That's what I've been doing for the last 35 years. And we started a new band in the middle school in Massachusetts. And they needed somebody to help the kids. We had no tubas, we had no lower horns, no bass instruments and all. And so the band leader, who wasn't really a professional or even a music teacher, asked me if I would help out by bringing the Barry sax. So I said, sure. And so I joined the Barry sax in the little middle school band and decided it was really fun for kids to see teachers learning along with them. And so I pretended that, I didn't really know much because, it had been quite a few years since I had
Mhm.
actually played. And so I started getting back into it. And so I was like the stalwart adult member of the middle school band for about 20 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and then one of our little band became so good that we actually had to have a music teacher who was giving private lessons.
Hmm.
And she was a trombone player, and she
Hmm.
said to me, we need a Barry sax player in Brattleboro.
Hmm.
And I said, well, no, there's no way I'm going to Brattleboro. It was a half an hour drive. from where I lived. And I had two boys who were, in high school, or maybe they were in college by that point. I can't remember. But anyway, I decided, well, all right, I'll think about it. So I went one night and I thought, there's no way. I sat in and I thought, there's no way I can play this music. It's way too advanced for me. I'm way out of my league. So decided, well, that was a nice visit. Thanks very much. And I said to the director, I said, I'm not, that's okay. And he said, no, 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 we need a bari sax player. And I said, but I really can't. And he said, no, you can. He said, anybody is welcome. You can do it. I know you can. And I was like, all right, fine. I'll try one more time. And so I did. And I've been there now for, I think it's probably close to 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And now become the manager of the band. But I guess what's really fascinating to me, and this is because of my story and how I got back into it, I've encouraged people they have to come to band practice more than once. Because for a community band, because it is intimidating to walk in there and not really know anybody and sit down in your section and you look at this music that everybody else has been playing and you're trying to sight read it at the same time and you maybe get every fourth note or every fourth measure and you feel so proud of yourself because you could at least count till the end, and then all of a sudden you're part of the family. And that's what community band is. People are part of the family and it's just really cool. People look out for each other, they call each other. We have little sectional rehearsals, and everybody is really so fascinating. And during COVID, we decided to Zoom to keep the band together. And that was how I became the manager because things were just falling apart. Our Wednesday night meetings were not happening. And so I said, well, maybe we should just Zoom and check in and see how people are doing. And because I was a school teacher, I had a Zoom account. So I just told everybody, I even had Zoom tutorials to try to teach some of the older members how to Zoom, because our band ranges from 12 years old to 85.
Okay. Wow.
And so some people that were not technologically savvy.
Yep.
And so we had Zoom tutorials and then they all joined on and we sort of started to play like a Hollywood Squares or, Two Truths and a Lie to sort of get to know the people because there were new people coming in and going. And it really kept the band together. And then when we all came back after COVID, everybody was like, they knew so much more about the people. It wasn't just we came for music. So I think if I was to, so since then I've joined two other community bands, one, the oldest community band in the second oldest in the country. And we only play in the summers, just in July. And then there's another community band up in Grafton that I play with in Vermont. But the Brattleboro band is the only one that goes year round.
Okay.
And then I play with the swing band, also goes year round. But that's because my instrument is an unusual one, so they needed a bari sax. So that's where I am.
What was the other two? Before we dig in a little bit, what were the other two groups' names, if I may ask?
Oh, sorry. So
Yeah.
the Montague Community Band in Montague, Mass.
Okay.
I think it's like 1834 or something that they
Okay.
started. And then the Grafton Cornet Band, which I think is also the community band up there in Grafton, Vermont.
Okay.
And what's fascinating about the different community bands is that there's a lot of the same people who play in all of these different bands. So scheduling band performances and stuff in the summertime is very, very difficult because there might only be one first trumpet and he plays in five bands.
Right.
That kind of thing. So but what's fascinating is that the number of people that are moving back to the area and in their late 50s and they're all of a sudden taking up their instruments again. I think possibly because they want to become part of a community again, and music was the segue when they were younger, and therefore, well, we'll give it a whirl. And so they find us on our website and they show up and we ask them to come a second time just to be sure, because we want them desperately, but we don't want to be so overwhelming that they run away.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's really kind of a very interesting dynamic. And our band, since COVID, we were down to about 22 members after COVID. People had aged out, they were scared. They just didn't think they could do it anymore. People lost their hearing because we had a really older population.
Mhm.
And now we're trying different things, like trying to team up with some of the local high schools to
Wow.
get some of the high school kids to just sit in, even if it's only for one or two numbers,
Right.
when we do a performance, because um, the local funding for high school bands has really died off. And
Mhm.
so what's going to happen to community bands?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's good you're taking the initiative to, show
We're
them that they
trying.
exist,
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
I have obviously been a teacher in the public schools, and I tell my friends all the time, make sure that they know that there is
Yeah.
something after school, and that's
Yeah.
kind of the point of this podcast. So I had a couple questions. I wanted
Sure.
to kind of go back to that. I'm not asking, any, as I call it, bashing questions, but I know you were saying like in high school you stopped, and I
Yep.
want to talk about that and then kind of how you started again. And I don't know if you remember, I mean, was it just the director that kind
It
of
was
pushed
just
you
the
away?
director.
Oh, it
It
was.
was.
Okay.
I loved the music. I loved playing music, and the
Oh,
middle
okay.
school band leader. I mean, it didn't seem to matter what the music was. I mean, we were playing like Die Meistersinger, and then we were playing
Yeah.
like Broadway show tunes and stuff. So it didn't really matter to any of
Didn't matter.
us
Yeah. Hmm.
what the genre of the music was. This guy just made it fun, and
You
he
just made
had
it fun.
energy, and he encouraged people. I'm sure I didn't play very well, but it didn't really seem to matter, because as
Right.
long
Hmm.
as, if you could hit the first note of every measure, that was fine with him when we were in seventh and eighth grade. So, and that we were just so proud. We were so
Hmm.
proud to play for him. And in high school, it became really a chore,
Okay.
actually. I think really it wasn't so much that the band leader was not as personable, although that's how I remember him.
Hmm.
It became like we were expected, if we were in the band, that we were going to go on to music school.
Okay. Okay.
And
That
that
makes sense.
wasn't, I was going to
Yeah.
be a veterinarian, so that wasn't what
Right.
I was going to be doing. So I knew that I had just loved music, and my dad had played the banjo,
Hmm.
and we all had sung in the church choirs, as kids and stuff like that. But really, so music was around,
Yeah.
as I grew up. I played piano when I was really little, but not really very good, well.
Okay.
So I could read music, but that was the kind of thing. I'd found a niche, and
Yeah.
then my niche was kind of like not good enough.
Yeah. I understand. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's sad that that kind of happened, because I know
Yeah.
my biggest thing, and I know I went off to school in music and everything, but we didn't have that experience, going through high school. It was just they wanted you to, be involved and do something fun for the community,
Right,
so
right. I mean, I loved the parades. I loved playing, we were just, we just, our community was small, and it was fun, and there were parades and stuff like that. And we all, geared up, and, did the best we could. And we had not fancy uniforms. We just had like t-shirts that were the
yeah,
same, that kind of thing. But once we got into high school, there was such a different feel.
different feel. Okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I wish that there had been like an alternative, like you could have had like I don't know what you call it, like an elective band,
Okay. Yep.
something where
Yep.
people could, like maybe an elective course, as opposed to
Yeah.
feeling like you were going on to,
Yeah.
Berkeley or wherever, Berkeley's
Yeah. Yeah.
in Boston,
Definitely.
something like that.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, definitely. I know, and it's food for thought, think about that
Yep.
environment. And I know we talk about that environment everywhere in music ed,
Everywhere. Yeah.
because like, and we'll get to this in a second, but especially, with the community side of it, it's just like you were saying in the beginning, it's, having that welcoming environment, because if not, they'll come once and they'll leave, the
No,
adults I'm talking about.
right.
It's the same
No,
for
and
the,
they're scared, they're
yeah,
scared because they haven't played in years,
yeah,
and
in
they're
years.
just
Yeah.
like, they're afraid that they're just not going to be any good. And then and that's it's tough, your embouchure isn't
Right.
there, and there's so much that goes into it,
Yep.
and you don't think you can read fast enough. And if you're intimidated by your director or the people around you,
Hmm.
you're not going to give it a try.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because it scares you off.
Right.
So I know it was, and I probably know the answer to this, but I have to ask. I know you didn't play for a long time, and
Right.
then you kind of got back into it. And I was interested, in the school, and you played in the middle school. I was just interested, I mean, other than I think it's the children, but I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. I'm just interested in finding out what motivated you to do that, especially to, play your Barry sax once again, you
Right.
know,
Right. Yeah.
and be in front of them, even if there are students, I mean, you still stepped up for those 20
Right.
years to do it. And I was just interested if you could talk a little bit more about that. Like, what was your motivation to do that?
Well, I guess, I mean, I guess I'm a teacher at heart and always have been. So
Hmm.
I felt that we as teachers sometimes pigeonhole ourselves into a particular subject area. And I was
Hmm.
teaching science, but I have a big theater background and
Hmm.
grew up in community theater as well. And I felt that kids only saw me as a science teacher. And so I thought,
Wow.
here's another side to me that no one knows. And maybe this would be fun for them and maybe make me less, I don't know, maybe more approachable
Hmm.
as a teacher
Okay.
of science and as a female in science,
Hmm.
because that could be intimidating too. Maybe there's something they could see, here's a vulnerability. And
Hmm.
so I decided to brush up the Barry sax. And of course, the other thing that was cool was that most of those kids had never seen that instrument before. So
Yep.
therefore, I had some really cool credibility right away with middle schoolers. So that was kind of neat. And they liked the sound. And then it really translated into giving them encouragement to carry on. When they couldn't hit one of the lower notes, there was me who could fill in that blank for them. And so
Wow.
it really became kind of something we did together. And eventually there was another teacher who joined playing the oboe because nobody played the oboe in the little middle school band because you can't rent those instruments from
Right.
from a rental. You can rent an alto sax, maybe a tenor.
Hmm.
Mostly it's flutes and clarinets, and everybody played drums.
Hmm.
So to rent those, those are the standard instruments that could be rented. Trumpet.
Yeah.
So some of those other instruments were not rentable
Okay.
uh, from those organizations because they're just too expensive. So anyway, so it was kind of fun for them to realize that, and I had an extra tenor, so I would lend the kids my tenor, and then
Oh,
they could
wow.
play along too. So that was kind of fun too. So that was really the motivation.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. And it's also neat that you still had your Barry with you,
I know.
because I will say that too, because it was like you didn't bring up that I had to go find one. You kept
No.
it.
Yeah, I did. I don't know why I kept it, but I just really loved it. I loved the sound. I loved it. It was really cool. I did find out too that it actually has quite some history, which is kind of fun. And so I'm
Oh,
so glad I never got rid of it.
yeah, yeah. Well, why don't you talk about the
So
history? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, go for it.
so way back when, this was probably in the 70s now that
Uh-huh.
I decided I was able to purchase this Barry sax. From a guy whose grandfather had it. It was
Hmm.
from down in he was a player in New Orleans,
Oh,
and I
wow.
was in New York State, and my dad worked for the state university, and somebody knew somebody who knew somebody, and this saxophone came up from New Orleans.
Wow.
Yeah, and so we ran like years later ran the serial number because I didn't know
Hmm.
anything about that when I was that age. So and it turns out that horn has traveled the world, and it's
Wow.
not a. I think it's a professional horn, although if it isn't, it's very high intermediate horn.
Yeah.
It's the reason why we think it's that is because the key structure over by the C
Hmm.
sharp G is not the new key structure. It's an old style.
It's the old style. Okay.
But we did find out, I think it's 1928 is the actual date of the horn.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's neat. So I'm so very glad I didn't get rid of it.
Yeah. It's neat to have those, especially when they have history to them.
Yeah.
Is one side of me, I don't know if I ever told you, I got like a double bell euphonium, which
Yeah.
they don't make them anymore, but mine's 30s, I think 36, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken, was built. And it's cool to play those instruments, especially to see them out there. So,
Yeah.
so I kind of fast forwarding a little bit, I know you kind of played in the middle school, band for a while, and then I know and it's very neat to be the educator side of it, but then you got motivated, I would say it
I
that way,
did. Yeah,
to go to the Brattleboro band. And I know and I was just interested if you could expand a little bit on. I know you went to the first rehearsal and I know it felt scary, and
intimidating.
I was wondering if you could describe that. And again, we're not bashing anybody here.
No,
We're
sure.
just
Yeah.
really talking about, what you see and what you feel
Well,
when you're
no,
there.
it was great. I mean, so they were really good. I mean, they were really good. I mean, they were so much of a step above middle school band
Hmm.
that I had been playing with. You know, like they were at that point in time, and it's even gotten better, but I think they were probably reading third grade music.
Wow.
And middle school band was like in first grade music at this
Uh-huh.
point. So and the thing was that they all knew what they were doing. There were
Uh-huh.
like 11 trombones when I first joined, and there were, tubas and 5 or 6 trumpets, and they were just blasting these songs, like
Hmm.
playing Stars and Stripes. And I took one look at that piece and thought, how could I possibly get my fingers moving fast enough to play that?
Hmm.
And I mean, I knew the song, but I
Right.
just was like, whoa. And so I sat there, and they were going to be working on going to a national competition the end of August. And this was probably in February when I joined.
Okay.
Um, and they desperately needed a Barry sax. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to competition with these people. I can barely hold my own. But the thing was that it was intimidating. The notes flew by so fast. There were
Hmm.
so many of them that I thought, well, how does one do this? I mean, how does one do this? How does one start over?
Hmm.
You know? And I was used to, several quarter notes and some eighth notes in a measure, and we were in 16th notes and triplets and stuff. And I thought, I just don't know how to begin. So I first thought that I maybe should take some lessons
Hmm.
to
Okay.
brush up, but that really didn't happen because there wasn't really enough. The timing wasn't working. So
Right.
I decided, I'll just I'll just try. So you know what I did? I listened to the music. I listened to YouTube renditions of it,
Uh-huh.
arranged by the guy, with my music in front of me.
Hey,
And
nothing wrong with
so
that.
I followed along, and just with my eyes, no instrument or anything else, just my music. And I would pencil in when the flutes would come in or the trumpets would come in or something. So if I got lost, I knew where I was
Wow.
when I listened. And so I would then be like, all right, so if I get lost, I know how to get back on the train, you know, 15, 20 measures later, and I can come in on that note. And so the counting really, I mean, I knew I was a good counter and I knew I could read music. So it was really that kind of technique that helped me the most to get started and to
Yeah.
feel confident. And then there would be days I would show up dutifully, and then there were days that I just got better and better and better. And the more I played, the better I got.
The better it got. Yeah.
And so that was really cool. And the thing was that I don't think the director knew my name at first at all. He just, that was kind of hard. But what I began to realize was that there were other people on my same part. Like sometimes the third trombone had my part.
Hmm.
And so I didn't have to feel so alone because I didn't play what the altos were playing or the
Right.
tenor was playing. But the trombones behind me oftentimes had what I was playing. So I
Hmm.
started to recognize the rhythms and the stuff. And the notes weren't that hard
Yeah.
once I got the rhythms.
Neat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll share this with you, and you'll probably laugh. When I started late in high school, and I was actually right. We had a junior high, so it was right when I went from eighth grade to ninth grade. And in ninth grade, I learned how to play the instrument, got some sound, and then in 10th grade, I still remember. I mean, our first concert was a Christmas concert, and lo and behold, Sleigh Ride gets thrown
Oh,
at me,
wow.
and it's like, and all the notes moving around, and I felt that, and I just wanted to share this with you. I did kind of the same thing. I started listening to YouTube versions of them.
Yeah.
I will say that, back in the day, and I don't mind saying this publicly, but I was listening to the Boston Pops version, which is
Ugh.
not the key of the band,
No, no,
and
no.
trying to play along with it sometimes,
Right.
and was like, why isn't this sounding right? But that's
Right.
another story. I was just a beginner. But That's interesting that you did that, just
Yeah,
because, you got yourself kind of focused on the rhythms and listening in part, and there's nothing wrong with that.
right.
So,
I
but
find I still do that today. Like we're
yeah,
we're gonna play 1812 Overture at our spring concert. And that's such a cool number, but I
yeah,
find I do exactly the same thing. Like sometimes I just don't have time to actually practice the whole piece. So I will listen and watch my
yeah.
music, and then I'll take the 16 measures that I know are really difficult, and then that's what I'll practice.
And then that's what you worked on. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I'll work on. But
Nothing,
the
nothing.
point, yeah, the best part about it is that I can find my place
Yeah.
after if I get lost.
Yeah. Well, I'll put a fancy word on that. I call it smart practicing. You're taking
Oh,
the time to working on the areas that you need to spend the most time with, and the other areas that you're doing fine with, you don't really have to practice.
although they're
So,
they're more fun for
yes,
sure.
they are more fun. That's for sure.
Yeah,
So, so that kind of really helps me kind of think a little bit about, this whole side of this. And I wanted to talk a little bit before you became, we'll talk about the pandemic and stuff like that, but as you kind of grown into the group, you know what I
mhm,
mean, and kind of get there, you got comfortable. You've been there now for 12 years, and you've
yeah.
been, playing, and it's obviously where I met you. But what has been so compelling for you to continue, as far as being in the group and also, continue playing? I mean, now
Right.
you're active in
Well,
three different
it's
groups,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, so that's really fascinating. So, and it's also coming full circle a little bit because um so there's two parts to this. One,
Yeah,
and
go
I'll
for it.
just digress a little bit, but the
Yeah,
the
sure.
full circle part, there's a guy who our drummer retired, and then we got another drummer
Hmm.
who is a music teacher up at Fall Mountain School, which is up quite a far up in Vermont.
Hmm.
And he plays, it's up near Walpole, and he plays, he doesn't, his band has gone, he's been there for a little while, but
Hmm.
when his students, who oftentimes return to play, there were 75 people in the band, and now it's down to about 14.
Okay.
And so what he does is he invites his friends who are adults, my age, people like that
Hmm.
who play unique instruments, to join in his two concerts. And he invites his eighth graders up so that those 14 kids can
Hmm.
feel what it's like to play in an ensemble.
That's
And so
great.
it's kind of cool. So it's high school, not middle school, but it's again these adults coming back to help kids
Hmm.
feel empowered to keep going.
Hmm.
And they see all these people. There's a tuba guy who plays at Keene State College who shows up, and I show up, and there's another saxophone player who shows up from I don't know where. But you know what I mean? That's the really cool thing, is that all these people are saying to kids, and it's really fun because this one, he said, okay, go back in there and get the tuner out. And this girl, she was in the eighth grade, and she didn't want to tune me because she was like, whoa, she's an adult, I can't. I'm like, no, no, come on, we got to be in tune. And so she held her little thing, and she's like, well, it's a little flat. And I was like, gotta be flat. It's always flat, and that kind of thing. But the point is, they were so excited, but
Hmm.
so nervous at the same time. But it was really cool because they're wanting to continue. So that's kind of what's neat about that. But I think for me personally, the band represents an area that I kind of wish I kept up with, first of all.
Hmm.
um, I find it, I think it's like a life skill. I mean, I
Hmm.
think that it's interesting that I have never forgotten how to read music. And the finger memory from back in the eighth grade came back almost instantaneously. So the notes were there, the fingers were there. It just was the timing and the embouchure and stuff that took time.
Hmm.
But what was really fascinating was the band represents a community of people that weren't part of my workplace, and
Hmm.
they weren't part of my family. They were something I did so it was a whole new community of people who didn't know me,
Hmm.
and just broadened horizons, because I think we sometimes get stuck in our workplace world
Hmm.
and our coming home world, and then we're just there, in our compartments. And so branching out to join the band was not something I expected
Yeah.
to find, to be perfectly honest. And now I have found it I think I play in 5 bands in the summertime.
Wow.
Sometimes with the same people, but still it's all different,
Yeah.
different groups, different things. And now I feel like they count on me to show up. And so there's that kind of thing too, it's sort of like, nope, got to go to band. Nope, got to rehearsal. And people always say to me, my gosh, you're so busy. You're always off. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that so cool?
Right.
Right. I'm always off. I'm always doing. I mean, I'm just always off.
I know I think all of us, we're like even me next week, I have some things I'm doing on my property and I was like, I have to take, this brush pile away, but at the same time, it's like, oh, got band on Tuesday
A
night. We got to,
band.
yep, can't do that.
No, it's true. And I think it keeps you active. It keeps you engaged. For me, it's allowed me, I'm now retired from the school, but it allows me to stay in touch with students
Mhm.
and stay in touch with other people in education. Um, and it really is it keeps me fit, because you've got
Nothing
to,
wrong to say that.
yeah, no, I mean, you've got to breathe into that huge, enormous horn. So, it's a really cool thing. And I really find like I met somebody we were sorting music one night and there was somebody at the bar and there were 10 of us and we were sorting these summer pops books and we all gathered at our Legion place and there's a bar on one side and we were all just sitting in the bar side and
Uh-huh.
because it was warmer. And this woman at the bar said, oh, I play flute. And we were like, well, where are you from? And what are you doing? And she's like, well, I didn't even know. And so we're like, okay, come Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock. And sure enough, she showed up and we said, now you just have to agree to come twice. And it was great. I mean, we're a little, domineering because we're so excited,
Yeah, right. I know it's
like
scary
a re-
yeah, it's
yeah,
scary sometimes
it's
because
very scary.
come with
Yeah,
us,
yeah, I
it's
know.
like
Yeah.
you want to hold you down.
Right. So we have to, we've taught people to just relax, just relax. But it's cool. You've got somebody like this old lady. She's hasn't been for a while, but I think she's 92 and she used to play the cymbals. And she
Mhm,
taught herself to play the drums because I think in her 70s,
mhm.
because she just wanted a community to belong to.
It's something big to say about that, wanting a community to belong to, because, and that's something I know you were involved already prior, but there's actually research talking, retired folks, for example, they're away from their workplace,
Yeah,
unfortunately, sometimes family is not around, or close or something, and it is an activity.
right.
So, and I wanted to kind of take a quick step back. You made that comment about that the high school that you play with,
Oh,
and then
yes.
that kind of that full circle.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, and I'm not trying to be, put words in your mouth, but something that I've been interested in, and I don't know if you could expand a little bit on, but I noticed like with this intergenerational, and I'm going to say that not be
No, I
funny
agree. That's
with
good.
them
That's a good
saying
word.
multiple people of different ages, and
Mhm.
especially when you're going into a high school to give them the ensemble kind of feel. I know you probably rehearsed. Did you notice anything, and I know we're comparing oranges and apples. I get that. Okay. But did you notice anything different with the students in the high school having multiple adults playing in the group compared to, the middle school I know was just you,
Right.
just as
Right.
the students learning process. You get what I'm saying? Is it
Yes,
like,
I
did
do.
you
I completely understand. Yeah. So I think I was more intimidated to join the high school because
Okay.
I thought that like my high school experience, they'd all be kids headed to Juilliard.
Okay.
So I thought, well, if there's only 14 of them, they're going to be like top-notch musicians, been
Yeah.
playing since they were two. And I'm not.
Hmm.
So that was my first thing. And I thought that they would also resent adults coming in to play with them because we can do it. We're our band, it's our band, we can do this,
Right.
who are these people.
Hmm.
So I went into it with those two misconceptions.
Okay. Okay.
Um, and the leader, who is our drummer, but he's the director of the band, he's so much like my seventh and eighth grade band instructor. He gets those kids doing stuff and feeling great. And there was this Keene State College tuba player, professional, sitting down there. There was a clarinetist who also is a professional sitting there. There was me, not a professional, but enjoying my instrument. and then and stuff like that. And he had us all doing the same warm up as these high school
Yep.
kids doing.
Hmm.
And so all of a sudden, we weren't multi-generational. We
Hmm.
were the same group, and
Hmm.
it was kind of cool. And after the fact, we played for this Christmas concert, and then we played again in the spring last year. And yeah, they were mostly their parents in the audience. There was
Right.
nobody else,
Hmm.
playing for us. But the thing was that the kids came up and said, "Are you going to play with us next concert? And would you play with this next concert?" And that was fascinating to me because I certainly
Wow.
didn't expect that.
Sure.
And they were grateful. They were
Yeah.
grateful. And I don't know if that's the middle school kids could have cared less whether I was there, really, except for the few kids that I was playing with in the lower section.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Interesting.
but I do think that the middle school kids saw me as the science teacher in a different light. I think that
Right. Sure.
it did help them embrace science
Yeah.
because I was in music.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You see
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think the high school kids saw it as a way of, like, for example, they came up to me and they said afterwards, they said, "Wow, we heard parts that we'd never heard before."
Hmm.
And that was because we had a tenor and a bari sax playing, and they'd only ever heard the alto part.
The alto part. Yeah.
And we had a flute player, and they don't have any flutes.
Hmm.
So it was that kind of thing. And they said, "Wow, it sounded so cool to hear all those other instruments."
Yeah.
So in a way, I'm hoping that this guy's experiment does bring, and he
Hmm.
brings up his middle school kids to play 2 songs with the high school band, the
Hmm.
mixed generational high school band,
Yep.
just in the hopes that those 7th and 8th grade kids will
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, because I'm a true believer. I think like what you're talking about is, the kind of their motivation to continue playing. And it is, not saying that if they were just the students that you couldn't carry on a band program at all, but it's neat that he's doing that just because I really feel like they're getting all that experiences in the sound. And then of course, not to be, coy here, but to say, hey, look, these people continue to play,
yes, oh,
because
exactly right. And that's exactly, well, I see them looking at me, with my gray hair, and the other guy from Keene State, he's got gray hair too. I mean, we're about the same age. And
Mhm.
they're like, "Wow," and they're really good. Like, they think we're really good. I mean, that guy's really good, but they think we're really good. And so it's kind of an inspiration, really. Yeah. And it's funny because my local public high school across the street, again, has a phenomenal music program,
Mhm.
and theater program. And it's due to the fact that these people recruit so early on in the middle
Mhm.
school. It just like they encourage the middle school
Mhm.
to to keep going, and the music in the valley. I mean, I think it really, like, a lot of kids don't have music in their home life anymore.
Mhm. Yep.
And I think that's something that I know I encourage most of the students that I tutor now
Mhm.
to take up an instrument and just say, you're kind of a bit lost, you didn't make the softball team or the soccer team.
Right.
How about trying music? Would you like to try music? And I'll show them some sheet music just for fun, say, "Hey, would like, oh, here's a really cool thing. Get this. I have a new grandson.
Uh-huh.
He's 7 months old.
Oh, wow.
I went to visit my son who lives in northern New Jersey, and I decided to take my Pops Books project because it's
Uh-huh.
huge. For when he was asleep, I could sort more music.
Uh-huh.
So my son was reading him a story, and so Julian was on his lap and I was sorting through music, and Julian could not take his eyes off the music, turned his head completely from the story,
Oh, wow.
staring at the music. Well, you know what? Babies are all into black and white.
Mhm.
So I had an extra piece of music. And so first of all, I sang the song that he was watching. And then
Nice.
and then I had an extra piece of it. And so I gave it to my son and I said, "Here you go. You can have this as your next storybook." Well, it's become a favorite of Julian's now that Gus will sometimes, when he needs to calm him down, he'll just show him this piece of music. And
Wow.
he's just fascinated by it. And of course, I know the whole black and white thing.
Uh-huh.
But then now Gus will sing Sentimental Journey because that happened to be the piece of, you
See,
know,
look at you starting them young, I see.
I know. And it's just cool because I can't wait for him to actually, bang on a piano or something like that, or a xylophone or something. But it's just really interesting to me
Yeah.
because I'm thinking, so Gus, my son Gus he played saxophone, he played euphonium. Both my boys did, not because I made them, but because it was required in our school
Oh,
that you
okay.
start an instrument.
Okay.
So it started with a recorder in third grade, the school that they went to, and then you had to take an instrument in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade.
Okay.
Then you had in seventh grade a choice to stay with band or to join chorus, but you had to do something musical.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of cool. But I think, yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about the journey that, and
Yeah.
I kind of wish I stuck with it, in college. I mean, when I was at college, and I went to Vassar, my favorite course was music as literature. And it
Hmm.
was a really neat, it was kind of a drop the needle course. They dropped it in the middle of this, Carmen the opera, and you had to recognize the instruments
Yeah.
and the motifs and stuff like that. And I just thought that was so cool. And I've never forgotten it to this day, never forgotten it. It was one of the hardest courses I ever took. But anyway, but it was really fun. And I think that I don't think I could have really ever played at the college level, but I have to say, I have improved so much
Yeah.
since my middle school band of 20
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. Well, it's just as you're saying, it's just like you've always, and I'm not, sitting here blowing smoke at you. I'm just more of like you've taken the time to study it, and if it was a challenge, you worked on it and you continued, and that's something big to say, because even though it was, you even scared, and
Yeah,
you stayed,
yeah, I
so
stayed, right, right.
and
Yeah, and I think it's when I look at my cohort of people, I mean, certainly the ones in the band are there, but when I look at my cohort of other teachers who are
Mhm.
now retired, I just don't think they have as much going on in their life, and it's kind of
Right.
sad.
Yeah, it is sad. Yeah, I know. And it's great you kind of latched onto this, because,
Yeah,
as you said, I mean, again, I don't want to say the wrong thing here, but it's like when you do retire, you can easily just stop and watch
yeah,
television, right? And
yeah.
not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's the fact that, you're very active with everything, and
Right,
that's
right,
awesome.
right. Yeah, yeah,
So as you moved on, and let's talk a little bit. I mean, I know you said something, about becoming the manager, and I was actually
right.
just interested. You played in a group that, you were intimidated about, we'll say it that way, and worried about. And I know the pandemic happened, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that, how you kind of came into that role, and wanted to help people and give
Right.
back as
Well,
far as that.
I think my educational training kicked in a lot because organizing the band at a large band like this and keeping a community band together
Hmm.
drew a lot on my middle school teaching skills,
Okay.
I will say, because there's a lot of personalities. And there's a lot of
Hmm.
people there for a lot of reasons. So some people in the band are professionals. Some of them are retired and they're just keeping going and they're very good. There are other people there for whom Wednesday night at 7 p.m. is their only social outlet.
Hmm.
And they latch on to that as something that is keeping them going. And then there are other people who just love the whole music part and carried on since high school and just continued to try to play in community bands and they just love it. But so the hard part is trying to find that balance for how do you take half a dozen professionals and half a dozen people who are really there for social reasons and half a dozen people who are in the middle and make them all sound great and
Hmm.
also um keep them interested. So the music
Hmm.
has to be a variety of stuff. It's enough. It's easy for some and challenging for others, but not everything completely challenging because
Hmm.
you're going to lose people right away with that.
Hmm.
So, and then trying to help the conductors, find their social balance as well.
Hmm.
Because some of them, because it's of all volunteer organizations, so no one gets paid.
Hmm.
And our conductors we wanted conductors who were willing to also work with the band and play in the
Hmm.
band. So that is kind of a thing about Brattleboro. like be one of us kind of thing.
Right.
And that was kind of an interesting thing. I would say that I ended up being the manager almost by default because I
Okay.
started the Zoom during the pandemic to keep the band together simply because I had a Zoom account
Hmm.
and I wanted the band to stay. I figured the band would stay together if they knew more about each other, if they knew
Okay.
people's backstories, where did you come from? How did you start music? Sort of like what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so that kind of happened. We would meet every Wednesday on the Zoom, and people would join in or not, leave when they wanted to leave. And different wives and husbands who we never ever saw would be like in the picture as well behind us, which was kind of fun. And so it kept us together. We did that for like, I would say, well over a year.
Okay.
Um, and then when we came back together again, people really wanted to know how people were doing. So it became a much more social event.
Okay.
So then we had to figure out how do we bring it back to music as well. And we started out by playing in a parking lot
Hmm.
so that we could socially distance and be outside and stuff. And that was kind of unique and odd at the same time, but
Hmm.
also funny.
Yeah.
And people liked it. And then we gradually increased the band and came inside, and it was great. And then our director, our manager decided he became ill and decided he had to retire from being the manager. And so we nominated people, and everybody nominated me, and that's how I ended up being the manager. It's a lot of paperwork in terms of email and
Yeah.
stuff, but it's very rewarding in a lot of ways because people do appreciate it. They
Hmm.
do appreciate the fact that we're keeping it going, and um, it's some hand holding in some cases,
Right.
um, but now to me, when I go to practice, I enjoy, I'm like one of the gang. I'm one of the
Hmm.
guys. I'm not just like, gosh, I'm really not prepared tonight. I didn't really practice this week. I'm just like, I'm the social director. So
Right.
it's kind of fun to keep the pieces all intact, and also get to play.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I just wanted to point this out. You were talking in the beginning kind of how we've been facing. I know I conducted and was
Yeah.
sort of like an assistant, I guess, for a little bit up the Brattleboro Legion
No, you
Band. But
definitely.
how I was conducting, it's like that's what you deal with. It's like
Yeah.
keeping all the different, minds together and keeping everybody on track with the music. And you have people of all different areas kind of coming to this. And it's funny that you were talking about that even in the capacity that you're talking with manager keeping everybody together, the emails and yet the reason why I'm asking is just because the behind the scenes stuff is a lot, as you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it's time consuming,
Yeah.
and it's
Well,
very
and like, for
interesting.
example, there are people who get so many thousands of emails, they just don't read another
Yep,
one. And
correct.
so I have a handful, there's probably a dozen people that even though I might send out an all band email, I personally text them to
Hmm.
say, there's an email, pay attention, or I'll just text them the message, no band tonight, it's a
Yeah,
snowstorm.
yeah, right.
Because, that kind of thing. And that's what I mean by a little bit of hand holding, is because I understand. I completely understand. I
Yeah.
used to hate that too.
Yep.
And it doesn't hurt. It doesn't require any extra effort to recognize the humanity of it
Hmm.
and just say, you know what? I get it. I'll text
Yeah,
you instead of emailing. It's just so much faster.
yeah.
And I think I think is where why the band feels like a family.
Hmm.
It's because you're willing to just say, there are people that say, no, they should all read their emails, you shouldn't be. And I'm just like, you know what? It's just really easier just to say, I get it. And
Yeah,
then just here's a text, a fast text, no band.
yeah.
They don't need to know why. They
Right.
don't need a whole sentence. They just need to know they don't have to show up tonight, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
right.
And so I feel like there's some humor. And I think if you can embrace the humanity of the different people and where they all come from. And then that was why it was so important for me to know the backstories. Because when I joined the band, the woman that I rode with, she'd been in the band for 10 years and she didn't even know the people's names.
Oh, wow.
And I kept saying, oh, you mean so and so who plays, trombone? And she'd say, oh, is that her name? And I would be like, how could you have been in this band and not know their name? She goes,
Yep.
well, I know what instrument they play. And I said, but that's not the same.
Yeah.
You know, so I really made I mean, it was nothing for me to remember names because they're, again, school training.
Yep. Hmm.
But I felt that, knowing that one guy has chickens and he couldn't come to band because he had a small barn fire,
Hmm.
to me, that was compassionate to check in with him later and to say, "Are you all right?" And I think that's the key. It's
Yeah.
it's it's knowing that there are people behind their instruments.
Right.
Well, and that, just because you might have been playing for 50 years and are still not really up to snuff, it doesn't matter. It's a community band.
Right.
And that's community is what we're about.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to have you expand on. I know you brought up the family side of it,
Yep.
and I was just interested in how and I know you've kind of described this already, but like how you find that, your band family, because and I'll say that this way, I think it goes beyond Brattleboro Band, because we're
Yes.
always in connection with each other, you know.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
Even
Well,
me and
I
you, I
think,
know I haven't
yeah,
seen you in a
I
while, and
know,
we're
I
we're
know. And
still
we
in
caught up right
connection.
away like
I
we
know.
just seen each other yesterday. Yeah.
Yes, right.
Well, I think that's the key. I think that is the interesting thing. So, one of the things that happened, and why I say it's a family, for example, somebody's horse got hurt, and
Hmm.
instantly people right away were like, how can we help? They had no idea how to help with a horse, but they were willing to lend a truck to get a trailer so that this horse could be taken to the vet or whatever it was. People came out of the woodwork. And I think there was a woman who got very badly stuck in this massive snowstorm and, that we had last year and lost power and everything else. And people went with snowplows
Wow.
on their trucks, because we learned about it at band
Hmm.
and she couldn't make it, so people went to plow her out so she could
Wow.
make it. So that kind of thing is interesting, and I think that even after people leave the band, like they move away or whatever, there's still, like you said, there's a connection. Like I get calls all the time from people in the New York area to say, can your band travel to New York to
Hmm.
march in a parade in Wallkill? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I can hardly field a band even right now to march in a parade in Brattleboro. But there's a guy who might know somebody else might know somebody else who has a band that is much closer to Wallkill,
Yep.
So, that's the kind of thing. It's sort of like this very large network of, in fact, here's a really funny story. I was on a ski lift this winter, and now I've decided to do a similar thing. I find downhill skiers are also musicians.
Oh, wow. I
Yeah.
wouldn't even have known
So
that.
I have started ski lift conversations because it's like a 5-minute ride, and usually like an elevator, everybody's like huddled in their little world and they don't talk. So I start the conversation and I'll say, "So where are you from? Are you local? Where are you from?" And then so one day I was riding up the chairlift with this woman and she said, "No, well, I am local." She said, "I live in such and such an area, and but I commute back and forth to Portland." And I said, "Portland, Maine?" And she said, "Yeah," because that's like 3 hours from
Hmm.
Brattleboro. And she said, "Yeah, I play flute in the Portland Symphony." And I said, "Wow, I play baritone sax in the Brattleboro Legion Band." And she said, "Oh my gosh, you must know so and so who plays flute." And I said, "I do." And she says, "I was her teacher."
Wow.
And then the other day I rode up with another guy who was a backup drummer for like almost made it, was going to be like a backup drummer for, Neil Young or something. And there he was on the mountain skiing. It was too funny. I mean, I've now discovered that there are more people that are musicians that are downhill skiers.
That's very interesting. And it's cool that you're talking to them.
Yeah,
It'll be interesting as time goes on how many
it
you
will.
recruit, you
I
know?
know, right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's just fascinating. So I'm trying to figure out what is the correlation between, but I think, you know what I think it is? Learning to ski is a life sport. You can
Hmm.
always ski. You can ski to whatever. You might be a racer when you're young, but you're just making
Yep.
those little S turns when you're older. You could still be skiing in your 70s, even with artificial
Hmm.
knees, or 80s. There are people that are 80s. And I think it's the same type of mentality as musicians.
Yeah, well said, because I kind of agree with that. It's,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of times of like what we said in the beginning, people get intimidated by the musicianship that needs to
Yep.
happen. And just like, you were saying in the beginning, get all these great musicians playing and then like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. And you are doing it,
Right.
and you're able to do that. And it's fascinating to see that.
Right. And when the audience stands up, at the end of a concert and they just are overwhelmed, it's
Mhm.
like the most amazing feeling. As a
It's all
community
worth
band,
it.
I mean, it's just the most amazing feeling to see these people who are like, they're all from the community,
Mhm.
with their lawn chairs out there in the summer concerts, and stuff. And, you play, we played Candide last summer,
Mhm.
and that was a real challenge.
Yeah, that's a
And
hard
people
one.
hated it. People hated it, and we did our level best to get through it. And I don't really think the whole audience knew the piece, but boy, I'll tell you, that was pretty impressive when we finally finished.
Yeah,
And they
it's not
stood up. They were just like, wow.
yeah, that Leonard Bernstein, that's a hard piece.
It was a really hard piece. We did a lot of tempo di Lerno on that one.
Yeah. It's a love her was it what I call it a
A
love hate
love-hate. Yes, it was. Yeah.
relationship with those pieces sometimes.
Yes, it is. It is. And then, and then of course, then, the movie Maestro came out and you could see, that whole thing. And I think all of us sort of like took on this like new sort of pride in the fact that we had actually accomplished that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's good. And I just think that it's I mean, I wouldn't give it up for anything at this point. I mean, we had to call tonight's rehearsal off because of this nor'easter that came through and massive ice and everything else. And everybody was disappointed.
Yeah. Yeah, bummed.
Yeah. They were bummed for not doing what they always do on a Wednesday night.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, yeah. So
So
anyway,
as we're kind of, ending this whole
yep.
talk here, I was interested, and this is a deep question. I've actually asked a lot of my participants this question, and you're going to appreciate this. Um, so when you're thinking, if you, and you're great at recruiting, and I know talking to people, so this should probably be easy for you. But when you hear somebody who either played or did not play, or someone like yourself who played, back in, school, public school times, or younger and not playing now, and what would you say to them? What would you say to somebody who's interested, kind of coming back and isn't intimidated, or somebody who is, you know, um, want to doing something like this? I mean, I've heard people who started in their 70s, started in their 60s playing instruments,
Right,
and wanting to get into the scene,
right,
and feel very, very intimidated just
right,
because, it's been a year or two, that they've
right,
actually
right,
played their instrument, maybe even less. What would you say to somebody, or how would you, being the manager, we can go
yeah,
there if you
right.
like, what would you do for somebody, to get them
So,
involved?
yeah, I mean, so it's sort of a little bit of a different approach, depending, like if they're just starting out and they've never played before,
Mhm.
I would encourage them to try to find a teacher in the area or
Okay.
something like that. Just
Hmm.
like, especially if they don't read music, just
Right.
you have to start, you have to at least be able to read some music,
Hmm.
But I would say that for most of the people that are brushing up, we had a woman just came back playing French horn who had not played for almost 40 years.
Okay.
And she had no idea whether she'd be able to even make a note out of the instrument.
Mhm.
And so with her, I said to her, I said, just come to the thing, sit in. You can have your instrument
Mhm.
ready and playing, whatever. But you can also just sit in and watch and listen, watch the music go by, kind of thing, like I did at my kitchen counter. And then I think for somebody who's sort of in their, later years, maybe above 50, let's
Mhm.
just say,
Mhm.
I think you can approach it and say, if you can count to the end of the music while you're listening, and you end up on the measure that everybody else ended up on,
Mhm.
you're doing really well in that very first meeting. If you're not playing, you're just counting. Because
Mhm.
if you can get that back, if you can follow the conductor in a 4/4 time or cut time or something like that,
Mhm.
and get to the end of the music and not feel like you are 57 measures behind.
Mhm.
That I think is rewarding and empowering. to somebody, because that's a skill that you got to get right off the bat, you know, in order to start to feel comfortable. At least
Sure.
I did. So that's sort of something that they can do without actually ever blowing a note.
Mhm.
And following the conductor and watching, and following the music and watching, and that sort of thing. And then I think what I've taken from Taylor, she says, if you can come in on the first note of every measure,
Mhm.
that's a great start.
Mhm.
And what she says is play the first note of every measure if you can do it, and then you add the second,
Mhm.
and then you add the third. And I think that's kind of, it makes it feel approachable. And then what she also says is, don't worry if you can't play the 12 measures in the middle that are all 16th notes. Someone
Mhm.
else will play that.
Mhm.
So you can, as long as you can count those 12 measures and come in on measure 13 on that first note, you're part of the band.
Mhm.
So that's kind of an interesting way. Now, what I also say with the students, with the younger students, say the high schoolers that I was working with in Grafton, or up in Fall River, I said to them, you know, because there's so few people, you have to kind of play every note almost.
Right. Uh-huh.
But so what we were doing in my little, you know, section that I was playing with was, we would talk about who was going to play the first note and who could really play all four notes in the measure or
Mhm.
whatever. And then what they needed to listen for so that they could come in maybe on the third measure and play theirs part, you know, that kind of thing. And honestly, it didn't take them long to have the confidence to play all the way through.
Mhm. Mhm. Very well said. Because, I think it's something about confidence. I think it's something about, approachability. I think and it's very interesting what you say of like how you go right there to get them confident to play,
Yeah.
because I always think, well, we don't want to turn them off,
No.
we
Well,
want them there.
you know, and that's why I think for me, like, I think for watching the music and not feeling like you have to play that very
Mhm.
first day that you come,
Yep.
you can just sit there and you can watch, but you have to be willing to give it one more try. And
Right.
that's what I always say to people. I said, you can come once, but you have to come twice. I mean, you can come tomorrow, but you've got to come the next week, you know? And it's kind of like I say it with a big smile on my face, because it's sort of like it doesn't work to just come one time,
Yep. Yep.
you know, and I'll pick you up and bring you the, you know, that kind of thing. Because that's really what gets somebody the motivation, is having somebody else say, come with me.
Mhm.
You know, we're ambassadors of the whole system.
Mhm.
And you can't just say, okay, I show up on Wednesday night. You actually have to go out and say, I'll come, I'll hold your hand, I'll bring you through the door. I know it's scary, you know, and I like to think that if a person doesn't feel like they have to perform on that very first day, it's so much less intimidating.
Right. Right.
You know, because I know that I felt like I had to perform and I was scared to death.
Mhm. Mm.
And I really couldn't. I couldn't even hardly. I mean, I might have made, you know, I could play the
Yeah.
warm up. That was about it, because I was so scared.
Yeah. Right.
I think
Right.
that, but I think if somebody had said that to me, like, no, it's okay just to sit there and watch and count to the end.
Yep.
See if you can make it to the end
Right.
by counting.
Yep.
If somebody had said that to me, I think I would have been so empowered, because I knew I could do that much,
Right.
you know?
I know. I think you get nervous that, the director is going to be like, you can't read the part. What are you
I know,
doing?
no, that's exactly what I
Get
felt. It was
out.
like, what? Where's the Mary sax? You know? Yeah, you know, but I
And
knew
he,
I could count. I knew I
yeah.
could count. And I figured that
Yep.
was my fallback, you know? So I think that teaching kids and teaching adults, it doesn't matter what age you are, it's
Mhm.
really teaching that confidence straight off the bat.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. Very well said.
Right?
Well, hey, I want
Well,
to thank you so much, for doing this and talking about this. And I mean, I know you were worried about it in the beginning,
yeah,
to discuss things, but you said a lot of great things. And I want to say, I know you're not a music teacher, but you're talking like a music teacher. I will say that too, and like an educator who cares about people.
yeah,
So
yeah,
thank you for that. Just because, there should be more of you out there to help
yeah.
people do the things and the fun things. And you keep, even on the ski lift, you're
I
telling
know. We're
people
still
like,
keeping it.
come join us because this is going to be fun.
It's really funny. Now I have a mission.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that because I mean
No,
you're just having a time of your life, and
Yeah,
and I appreciate that you stayed with it, just because as we always talked, when I was up there for this short
right.
amount of time, I was up
Yes,
in New Hampshire and Vermont. It's just compelling to just see you work with people and want people to be there and enjoy,
right.
music making. And that's the whole
Right.
point of this.
Well, and the thing too, and I'll just say this too, about when you came to the band, I think what I have now learned, and this is something because of being in the band, is that as an educator and as a student of music, which I consider myself to be, I learned so much from different directors.
Yep.
And I think that if you only ever play under one person, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice as a learner of music, or somebody who's trying to keep up with it. Because I remember when you joined, I was like, wow, that made so much. You had us in a circle
Yep.
where we were playing at each other instead of in lines. And I was like, wow, that makes so much sense, because all of a sudden you could hear the different parts,
hmm
you know, and
Yep.
it was really cool. And so I thought, well, that's really interesting. So since then I've played under now probably 6 or 7 different directors, and they're
Uh-huh.
all different, and they all have different styles. Some are really great. You can follow the downbeat, some not at all,
hmm
and some you have to really listen across the band, because otherwise you have no idea where the director is,
hmm
in that way. But each one gets a little bit more out of me and makes me a better player and a better musician. And I really now consider myself a musician, which I didn't necessarily think of myself as that. But I do consider myself a musician, and I'm really proud of it.
Yeah. Hey, you sound it, and that's great that you're doing that. I know you always, and don't take this the wrong way. It's like
No,
you sell yourself short, and
oh,
you've been
I
a
always,
musician
yes,
all along.
yeah. Well, I always do sell myself short in that regard, because
Mhm.
I was not a professional, and I just didn't think I was up to snuff to play or be worthy.
Yeah.
And I'm now beginning to think that it's okay. I am worthy. So that's cool.
Yeah. Well, and you're telling other people this already, but keep that in mind as you meet people, because I think there is the professional world,
Right.
and where you got to read the parts, you got to play, and you got to sub in, and it's all about that. But there's those community groups that exist out there that and that's what I find neat of everything. And I know you already know this, but I love seeing people kind of coming to this and wanting to, who might be a little intimidated,
Yep.
and then I can push their button, or they can push their own
Yeah.
buttons, and we can get to this
Yep.
amazing thing.
Right. Right.
So
No, it's really cool. It's really cool. Well, I appreciate you doing this, because I really have had a great time talking about it. And it's kind of stuff that I hadn't really articulated out loud in any one setting, It's stuff I've done and do, but I didn't really actually realize I was doing it.
yeah, well,
So
hey,
that's kind of fun.
well, thank you. Now we'll put it out there in the public world.
Great. Sounds terrific. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Martha.